Welcome to the Forged by Trust podcast. I'm your host, Robin Dreeke, former U.S. Marine, spy recruiter, best-selling author, and your trust and communication expert. Today's episode is brought to you by my guest, Jon Rennie, and his recent best-selling book, You Have the Watch. Leadership skills are like any other skills. You need to practice them to get better at them. Best-selling leadership author Jon Rennie knows this. That's why he's written a new book called You Have the Watch. It's a guided journal for leaders to take you through an entire year of leadership training. There are 50 themes in the book, and each day you will reflect on a different facet of that theme. This journal is designed to be on your desk at work for you to read and reflect on for 15 minutes each morning. By the end of the year, you will master 50 of the most important leadership skills. If you want to have a greater impact on the results and people in your organization, go to youhavethewatch.com and pick up your copy today. Coming up next on the Forged by Trust podcast.
And both my grandfathers were World War II veterans. So I was that curious kid that was always asking questions, but it was this idea that I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to fail. There is no plan B, only plan A. And so I had to figure it out. You have to shut your mouth a little bit, and you have to do a lot of listening, and you have to do a lot of observing and a lot of asking questions and being curious. But my secret sauce is I'm going to outwork you. I'm going to figure out what you're doing well, and I'm going to do a little bit better. What I've noticed is that people who are great leaders are always learning and they're always trying to improve, and they're the ones that are consuming content. My North Star is all about helping to build a world with better bosses.
Welcome to the show. I'm Robin Dreeke, and on the Forged by Trust podcast, we decode the interpersonal communication skills of the world's most acclaimed forgers of trust. We unlock the skills and techniques from spies, spy recruiters, master interrogators, globally recognized behavioral experts, C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, acclaimed authors, and thought leaders. Each episode provides specific actions that you can immediately apply to any aspect of your personal or professional life. Today's episode, Earn Your Oxygen, is with my friend, former submarine officer, CEO, author, podcaster, Jon Rennie. Jon S. Rennie is a business leader, best-selling author, speaker, and podcaster. He's a co-founder, president, and CEO of Peak Demand, Inc., a manufacturer of critical components for electrical utilities. He's a former U.S. Navy nuclear submarine officer who made 7 deployments during the end of the Cold War. Prior to starting Peak Demand, he led 8 manufacturing businesses for 3 global companies. He is the author of 3 best-selling leadership books, I Have the Watch, All in the Same Boat, and You Have the Watch. He's host of the Deep Leadership podcast. Jon successfully brings his unique Navy leadership experience to the business world. On a submarine crew, officers and sailors work together in cramped spaces and challenging conditions to accomplish complex missions with no room for failure. Jon learned quickly that the basic underlying principles for success at sea also led to high-performing teams on land. During today's episode, we talk about secret sauce to success, earning your oxygen, and discovering your North Star. Hey, Jon.
How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you doing?
I'm great.
We had such a great conversation last time. I want to kind of recap some of the great things we talked about. One of my favorite questions to start out anything with is getting that backstory, that journey. You are by original trade a submariner, I should say. Boy, I got it wrong.
No, it's submariner. You had it right. Yeah.
Okay. So what is that story? You're both a entrepreneur in your own company. You're the CEO and executive of other things. But it didn't start that way. There's always some humbling moments in life. So what is that backstory?
Yeah, so I grew up with kind of a great experience. My grandparents and my parents we all lived close to each other. So I had all 4 grandparents and my parents as a young child growing up in the same town. And both my grandfathers were World War II veterans, one in the Army and one in the Navy. So I was that curious kid that was always asking questions. I was really curious about their experiences and what they went through. And I was one of those kids that was deep into sort of, the World War II, history and reading stories and watching movies. And I just was fascinated with all that went during that time, but especially I got fascinated with submarine crews and all the things they did and the missions they went on, all these kind of this covert type operations. And I just kept being fascinated by that, the idea of an underwater military asset that could be, used effectively in various, types of combat situations. So I made a decision early on, like before even high school, that I wanted to be on submarines and I wanted to be a submarine officer. And that's a great thing to decide on early in your life and have this dream of doing it. But I had no idea how to get there. Right.
Right.
So, I was like, so I started trying to figure out, how does one get into, the submarine, community. And as it turns out, you have to be very strong technically. Right. So you have
Smart,
to be,
right?
yeah. So, and no one in my family really had gone to college at that point. So like, I had to learn, they said, well, engineering is the best route. So before even high school, I said, okay, I want to be an engineer. So how do I become an engineer? What is that? How do you become one? So I learned you had to be strong in math and science, and you have to get good grades, and you have to get into a good engineering school. And so I went through all that whole process, did decent enough in high school to get into a really good engineering school, got an ROTC scholarship, and I went through the whole process. And then
which also, none of these things are any small feat. I mean, those are challenging things unto themselves. So, and where did you go to school?
I went to Worcester Polytech in Worcester, Massachusetts, studying mechanical engineering. Again, I couldn't even spell engineer before I started, and I had to figure out what an engineer was. So.
And for those that aren't engineering people listening in, I want you to know that mechanical engineering is probably the number one toughest, or at least top three. Mechanical, aerospace, electrical, those are like the toughest you can possibly do. I only know that because, I have the proud parents, and my son just graduated Naval Academy as a mechanical engineer, and living and watching what he went through, I can't imagine what you're going through, because as you said, you had no background in this. What made you decide mechanical engineering? Because that's a challenge. That's a huge challenge.
So you might laugh at this, but I've always been good at fixing things and working with my hands. And I grew up in a blue collar family. My grandparents' parents, we were blue collar, fix anything. So electrical, you can't see it, right? Mechanical, right. I could see it. So at least I figured, well, if I can see it, I can understand it. And so mechanical and same thing with chemical engineering. What is that? Who knows? I mean, I have no idea. Even today, I don't know what that is. but mechanical, you can sort of understand, okay, gears, I can understand materials, I can understand strength and strain. And these things made sense to me. So because again, I'm more of a blue collar, more hands-on type of individual. So those sort of things made sense to me. And sorry, Jon,
I love these little rabbit holes. Did you do any capstone project or anything that as an engineering major then?
Yeah. So I was studying, I did a lot of work in composite materials. So being able to design what we were doing was a project to do aircraft wings with composite materials. At that time, composite materials, this was in the 80s, was a big deal, and it was something new. But that's what we were trying to do, is be able to do a design program where you could design an aircraft wing like you would with standard metals, but only doing it with composite materials. So it was like a computer program. I have no idea what we did. It was cool though. I remember at the time I knew a lot about it.
Sorry, I know I got the Wayback clock going hard on you, but I'm fascinated by it as well. Anyway, keep going with that Wayback story.
Yeah. So, I mean, I did decent enough in engineering school. And then once you get like towards the end of your time, your junior year, you actually make a decision to go into the nuclear power program. And then you have to go to Washington, D.C., and you have to be interviewed by an admiral as a midshipman. You have to get interviewed to get into the nuclear power program. And again, all these hurdles, as you mentioned, have to do decent in high school. You got to get into engineering school. You got to do decent in engineering school. Then you got to fly to Washington, D.C., and you've got to get hand selected to go into the nuclear power program. And I did that, and I got in, as a midshipman sitting in front of an admiral, like nervous as all get out. But I was able to get through that process. And then I got accepted in the nuclear power program. And then boom, I got my commission. I'm off into the Navy. And the first place I go to is Nuke Power School, which was in Orlando, Florida at the time. And if you know anything about Nuke Power School, it's the toughest academic military training that we have in the United States.
Yeah, no doubt.
And I show up there and I'm with guys from MIT and Stanford and the top engineering schools in the country, the Naval Academy, and me. and so I had to get through this 6-month program, which was pure academics, pure classroom studying nuclear engineering, which, just to give you a flavor how difficult it was, my roommate was my roommate in college. He was a 4.0 nuclear engineer in engineering school. He failed nuke school. I made it through.
Wow.
I mean, it was a very difficult course of study, and I barely made it through. But I knew enough to learn, to pass the exams and get through.
So
I write about it in my book that I had no plan B. This was the
so
way to the fleet.
So I'm a big believer that we're not islands. We can't be, because with all
Right.
these obstacles and hurdles you're facing. I mean, it sounds like you might be glossing over some of the, and I don't mean in a negative way, glossing over the fact that you probably didn't do this alone. Did you have anyone that was a teacher, mentor, guide? How'd you keep from failing out and your friend didn't? I mean, was there any magic sauce in there?
Yeah, actually, there's a lot, and I do write about it in my second book, which is called All in the Same Boat. But just it was this idea of not having a plan B and just figuring out a way to get through. And so, no, I didn't really have a mentor. I had peers. Obviously, we're all struggling to get through it alike, but it was this idea that I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to fail. There is no plan B, only plan A. And so I had to figure it out. So it was like decoding how I could pass the exams, get to the next hurdle. And, I found there was a system to it. Like you, this sounds really bad. You didn't have time to learn all these techniques and all this information, but you did have time to memorize it. And you did have time to put it in your short-term memory. And I figured out a way to do things in short-term memory to be able to spit it back out on exams, spit it back out in front of people. And it was good enough to get through. And it sounds terrible, but the pace of that program is not meant for you to sit down and let it absorb into you and to really learn it. You just had to understand enough to just be able to spit it back on the exam. And I also learned techniques like, they stressed a certain thing, like I noticed instructors would stress certain points. I'm like, this may be on the exam. So I know it sounds bad, but it was to get to the next point. It was just do what you need to do to get to the next level. And then the next level was prototype. So you spend 6 months operating an actual nuclear power plant. As I mentioned, I'm a hands-on guy. That was easy. I mean, actually operating the equipment, understanding and watching how things happen, that made sense to me. And it was super easy at that point. And then, of course, submarine school for 3 months, and then you're off to the fleet. So I reached my dreams. As a young man, I show up on the USS Tennessee right after a year and 3 months. And I was pretty confident at that point. I'd gotten through all these hurdles. And until I came around the corner, the USS Tennessee was in dry dock. Have you ever seen a Trident submarine in dry dock? It's a massive vessel. And I came around the corner, I saw that, and all my confidence disappeared at that very moment I saw the submarine. I'm like, I am not ready for this. This is bigger. This is more dangerous. It's difficult than I ever thought. And that was my, introduction into getting into the fleet, getting on the boat. And even once you get there, there's another year-long process to get qualified as a submarine warfare officer. So it was another hurdle. Once I got there, it was another year's worth of work.
Yeah, I've heard the welcome aboard to the junior officers can be kind of challenging.
Yes.
The trials and tribulations they put you all through. I faced this as a Marine. One of the greatest challenges I experienced was my drill instructors and my Marines that worked for me were literally, they felt like they're twice as old as me with 4 times as much experience. What was your first experience leading people that were older and more experienced than you? How did you deal with that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, that's such an incredible experience. And just similar to you, I get to the Tennessee, throw my sea bag on my rack, and one of the officers takes me out back to introduce me to my team, and I find out I'm running the reactor controls department, which is a bunch of sailors and senior enlisted that operate that maintain and operate the controls for the nuclear reactor. Pretty important stuff. And I meet my chief petty officer, who's been in the Navy about as many years as I've been alive. And then I meet the entire team, and I realize that I am the least qualified person out of any of the people in my department, and I'm in charge. And that's definitely a humbling experience, and one that sort of makes you think, okay, what do I do next? And a lot of leaders find themselves in that situation where they get promoted or moved into a role where they're not the oldest or the most knowledgeable in their role. And so I found myself in that kind of position. And, as you know, when you're in that position, you have to shut your mouth a little bit, and you have to do a lot of listening, and you have to do a lot of observing and a lot of asking questions and being curious and, being present, spending a lot of time with your team and trying to understand what they do and what the challenges are and what the problems are and what's important and what's not important. But on the other side of it, you got to do your job really well. There's no substitute for the role of the leader. The leader has certain things that only the leader can do. And so you have to do those things really well, as well as learn what your team does well. And I think the idea of being humble and being inquisitive and getting to know your team really well and them getting to know you, and then building that respect, they start respecting you by the work that you do and the effort that you're putting in and how quickly you're learning and how quickly you're no longer a liability, but you're an asset to the team. And you have to earn your way onto that team. And anyone that comes into a leadership position and thinks that, well, I'm in charge because I have rank or I have a title, you're going to be in trouble, as you know.
Yeah. Title and position mean nothing. Guaranteed. There's no doubt.
Exactly. Yeah.
You mentioned the humble. Did you come into it with humility already, or did you have a humbling moment?
No, I came into it humble. And again, I think maybe because of my background and being more blue collar, maybe a little dash of imposter syndrome, like, I can't believe I'm here. Maybe someone made a mistake somewhere along the line. I shouldn't be here. I think I definitely felt humbled when I saw the Tennessee for the first time. I really felt like there was a confidence level I had until I came around the corner and I went, oh crap.
That is one big machine.
Yeah, it was one big machine. And then, there was hundreds of people around it. There was grinding, people were welding and grinding, and there was smells of, generator smoke and just like yelling and horns. And I'm like, holy cow, this is chaotic. I mean, and we're going to take this thing to sea, it was just wild.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I've gone into situations like that, especially when I was a midshipman, going through my training. I was way overconfident in everything I did in my life. Me traveling across the islands as a 19-year-old, not knowing anything, and walking into this maelstrom of noise, smell, and chaos, like you said. And the thing that hit me was, my God, there's someone here that understands what's going on, and it ain't me.
It's so true. Yeah, it's so true. I think it just makes you feel pretty small. And I think that's really good, though. I think we need to have those humbling moments where we recognize that we aren't everything, and we need our people, we need our team, we need the experienced people around us if we're going to be successful. And again, this repeated throughout my career. My first manufacturing plant I ran, I was 32 years old, and it was the exact same experience. Like, I'm ready for this, until I came around the corner and saw this giant manufacturing plant with all these people looking at me, older than me, more experienced than me, and I'm the youngest plant manager in this 40-year plant history. And they're like, what do we do next, Jon? Like, what do we do now? I don't even know. So these things repeated in my career, so I'm glad I had those moments, because it really did help me later on in my career when I, took on more and more responsibilities outside the military.
Your curiosity and humility and your positive outlook seeds from you, which I think are the traits you need for the kind of success that you've obviously had, because you're continually upbeat. It doesn't sound like you ever felt yourself a victim, and there was no plan B.
Yeah.
So it was all
same
in.
Yeah, same thing. I did not have a plan B. I didn't know what. In fact, I was telling you about my roommate. He ended up not getting into the nuclear power program. He ended up stuck on a reserve frigate out of Long Beach, California, and just had a terrible military career. So he went surface. So I had this amazing adventure I went on, and he's a really tough, military career. And the difference was just it was this much difference. It was that little bit of extra effort, this little bit of I have no plan B. I'm going to figure out how to make it happen. But it was this small. I mean, the margin of error for having this amazing career and having one where you're a disappointing career was that close. I
really wonder, looking at that struggle, looking at your academics, and looking at your roommate that failed out, there are so many things in life that you really can't put a thumb on that are very subjective. Do you think anything had to do with you and your personal brand that actually helped you get through that? Because I mean, I wouldn't want to get rid of you. Look at you. I mean, you bring positivity to situations. So do you think there's anything that helped that as well?
So, I mentioned coming from my roots and where I came from and being a little bit blue collar. I think there was a chip on my shoulder. There always has been, still is today, that I don't come from I don't know, some, like a long line of engineers or a long line of successful entrepreneurs or a long line of successful business people. I'm kind of the first in my generation, you're first in my family, first to do all these things. And again, I think I come from like humble roots and a blue collar work ethic that I'm going to outwork you. I may not be that smart, but I'm going to outwork you, and I'm going to figure out a way to outwork you. And I've always been a little bit competitive too.
Uh-huh.
So like even with my peers, when I was in corporate, I was running factories, and we always had other factory managers in a certain division. And I was always just like quietly competitive. Like, I'm going to beat you. I don't care what you do. I'm going to beat you. I'm going to figure out a way to my plant is going to be better than your plant. We're going to have better on time delivery. We're going to have better quality, better profitability. And again, it's a chip on my shoulder. I've had it for a long time. And I think, I look at a guy like Tom Brady. Tom Brady plays with a chip on his shoulder.
Yeah.
Like he, and mostly because he was like 6th round draft pick. Right. And he plays with this, like, I don't care what it's going to take. I'm going to beat you. And I guess I have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. I think that gave me a little bit of an edge over my career, is that, I just want to prove that some kid from, New Hampshire. Yeah, I grew up in Manchester, New Hampshire. Some kid from New Hampshire can do all these amazing things too. You don't have to come from, an elite family or, go to an elite school. You can still do it through hard work and effort. And it certainly has paid off.
Hard work, effort, and that positive, infectious outlook you have. I mean, you just beam excitement, you beam enthusiasm, and who doesn't want that around? So when you can bring the technical skills and bring the brand that people want part of their team, and I thought the way you described it is perfectly silent competitiveness. You weren't, it doesn't sound like you were braggadocious. Doesn't sound like when you won, you shoved it in someone's face. It's that silent resilience that said, yeah, I got you, but I'm keeping it to myself. I'm going to let you suffer. Knowing that you failed to a guy from New Hampshire.
Right. Exactly. It was kind of funny because I remember some of my peers called me the golden child because I kept getting awards and I would get advancements like, oh, Rennie's the golden child. And I'm like, I am the farthest thing from the golden child, but my secret sauce is something that I'm not going to tell you what it is, which is I'm going to outwork you. I'm going to figure out figure out what you're doing well, and I'm going to do a little bit better.
Right.
And that's just always been something with me. And in fact, as an entrepreneur, it's great because you need that, over the long haul, right? This is a difficult thing. You're in it all by yourself. You're betting on yourself. And it's funny because my competitors are all these large global, billion-dollar companies, and they're slow and they're kind of lazy. And it's fun to outmaneuver them and outthink them. And our my little company's got better products than they do. And it's just kind of fun to do, but it's that same kind of blue collar work ethic, that hard work that, we're going to beat you, and we're a quiet competitor. We're going to find ways to beat you every time.
You're talking that magic secret sauce in that arena too, that Simon Sinek talks all about in his books, whether it's Leaders Eat Last or Start With Why. And that is innovation comes through deprivation, being behind the 8 ball, being small, not having as many resources causes our brains to really innovate and solve problems. So I'm calling this episode Earn Your Oxygen. What's it mean to earn your oxygen? And how do you actually do that?
Yeah, so it comes from my time on the submarine. And as I mentioned, when you show up on a submarine, you're unqualified. So for an officer, it's about a year-long process to get fully qualified on all watch stations and earn your submarine warfare pin, which is called our dolphin. And, like the Navy SEALs have their trident. We have what's called a dolphin. It's like your naval aviators have their wings, but ours is the dolphin. And it's a very coveted piece of metal, and that you work really hard to get. But when you first show up to the boat, you're what's called a nub. You are a non-useful body, and everybody reminds you of that. So, and they remind you that you are eating food and breathing the oxygen of people that deserve it, and you do not deserve it. There is a high level of positive peer pressure to be qualified. And part of the reason for that is a submarine, of course, operates alone in the ocean without any other support vessels, right? So we operate hundreds of miles away from our nearest asset and hundreds of feet below the surface. So there's this shared level of responsibility that's very unique to any military branch. And also this shared vulnerability, right? One sailor moves the valve the wrong way, you all die. That's what it is. So from the captain to the most junior sailor, everybody has to carry their weight, and everybody is equally vulnerable. So that means that we have to depend on our fellow sailors for our very lives, right? So to carry out our mission and get home safely, we need to depend on each other, right? So when you show up to the boat, nobody can depend on you because you're a nub, you're a non-useful body. And they say, there's a quote from an anonymous submariner that says a nub is an annoyance at best and a liability at worst. And so you don't want to be a liability. So you want to earn your oxygen. You want to be a valuable member of that team. And to earn your oxygen meant getting qualified and learning everything you needed to know to be an efficient watchstander. You knew the systems backwards and forwards. You could be there for your peers when something went wrong. You were trained in every single casualty that could happen on a submarine. For example, in a fire on a submarine is one of the more dangerous things that can happen. Sure. And we had to learn we were all trained as firefighters, and we were trained to run towards the fire, not away from the fire. So we had to learn all these skills, and we had to prove these skills to capable watchstanders. You had to go get qualifications. You had a qual card that you actually physically had to go seek out members of the submarine crew that were junior to me. And I had to prove to them that I knew how to operate the torpedoes systems, how to deal with a torpedo casualty, everything about the reactor, everything about the engine room, everything from, the entire missile system. I had to prove that I had the knowledge. And then I had to sit in front of a board with senior officers and again, answer questions and prove that I could do what I could do. And then about a year after my training, completed my qualifications, and I earned that coveted gold dolphins that I wore on my uniform. And that's probably one of the most important most important days of my life outside of being married and the birth of my children. Getting qualified was one of the most important things that ever happened to me. And it meant I was part of an elite crew, and I proved that I could do everything on that boat from the bow to the stern. I knew every system. I knew how to operate everything. I knew how to operate it when things went wrong. And it's just a tremendous amount of work. What's interesting about that is when I left the military, I went into corporate America. There is no qual card. And probably people listening into this that work in, big companies is like, how do you get qualified in a...
Let me stop you real quick, Jon.
Yeah.
How many years did you do in the Navy again before you got out?
5 years. I was 5 years. Yeah.
And that's what's really impressive here, because I'm listening to these stories that are going back quite a while. And they're so crystal clear and so succinct because they made such an impact on you. So keep going with it. I just wanted everyone to understand. It sounds like Jon did an entire career in the Navy and got out yesterday. No, this is a little bit of time ago because it was that impactful. Keep going.
Yeah. I got out in 1994 for those that are listening, trying to figure out the timing of this. But when I first got out of the military and got into, corporate America, it was the same thing. Like I didn't want to be a nub. I want to be useful. I didn't want to be, just someone getting a paycheck sitting in a cubicle someplace. So, but there is no qual card when you get to a big company, right? There is no direction for your career. I came in through engineering. I was hired as a design engineer for product development. And when I got there, I got a cubicle with the light didn't work, and there was a stapler on the desk, and there was no computer. And my boss was fired about 3 weeks after I was hired. So that was my role. That was my intro to corporate America. And I was like, A, why did you hire me? And then B, what do? I don't even know what to do. I don't even have a computer. I mean, it was wild. And so I kind of went back to my roots in the military. I'm like, all right, well, I got to get qualified. Well, what does getting qualified mean at this company? And so I did what I did on a submarine, which was go to the senior watchstanders, go to the senior people in the company and ask them what they do. Ask them, what does it mean to be a design engineer? What does it mean? I see you go down the shop floor a lot and you're talking to the operators of different machines. What are you doing down there? What kind of questions you're asking? What does it mean to do a design project? What are the types of things that I have to do to be able to complete a project? And I just started being almost like a puppy dog, following these engineers around, asking a lot of questions. And then the other thing was volunteering. I started volunteering for every, kind of HR, we have all employee meetings. We need somebody to do an employee survey. I'm like, I'll do it. And we need somebody to be qualified as a internal quality auditor. I'm like, I'll do it. And so I just kind of kept volunteering for things so I could learn the business, understand how it operated, and be a valuable contributor to that business. And I did this for 5 years, just kept learning and I just kept my name. I built a name for myself as someone that, well, Jon will get it done. Jon he's always, eager to help. He's eager to learn. And then it turns out the quality manager got promoted, and there was an opening for a quality manager. And like Rennie's, he's qualified on all these things. He does all these, he has all this experience and knowledge. Let's make him the quality manager. So it was like a natural, they went to the guy that was doing all the work and working hard and learning. So I went from kind of entry level associate design engineer to a quality manager in just a couple of years. And then in 5 years, I'd been promoted to engineering manager, and then a plant opened up 5 years after I, left the military, and they put me in that role because I had constantly proved that I had the capability to do more and more. And I kept taking on more and more responsibility and delivering the results and working hard. And they're like, this is the guy we want running our manufacturing plants.
All I can say is, for everyone listening or watching, if anyone's wondering about how to develop a personal brand, that is it by definition. You curious, you're positive, you took all the crappy jobs and you just dove in with initiative, proactiveness. You were doing this to be competent, to not take up oxygen and be not a nub. Who wouldn't want you on their team? Everyone will fight for that person. And it comes down to downsizing. Who you can want to keep? Do you want someone who knows how to flip the switches really good, or do you want a Jon? And Jon might not know how to flip all the switches today, but I guarantee you tomorrow he's going to teach you everyone else how to flip the switch. I mean, it's crazy that you were doing this at such a young age. Where do you take that and how do you pass that along?
Well, it's funny. I've had 3 phases in my life, the way I look at it. And, I had this dream of being a submarine officer, and I achieved that dream. And I left the military. I didn't know what I was going to do. I spent a long time adrift, to be honest. And I think a lot of people leaving the military do that. They try to figure out, okay, what's my North Star now? My North Star was I wanted to serve my country. I wanted to be on submarines. I achieved that. And then what do you do when you achieve all your goals at 25 years old? Well, what do you do next, right? And so it took me a while, but I can tell you that my North Star developed over time. And it wasn't in my first manufacturing plant. I worked in that role for about 3.5 years. And then I got moved to another company where I was running 2 manufacturing operations. And it was there, and I was trying to turn around a struggling plant up in Ohio. And it was there where I really felt my passion, which was I am here for the blue collar worker. I'm here to save plants, to turn around businesses, to make businesses successful, ones that are losing, ones that are struggling, to empower the people, bring all the ideas to the table, and to make these businesses successful. And that's what I ultimately did throughout the rest of my career. But I found my new North Star, but it took me a while to do that. And once I did, it all became very clear. My goal was to turn around plants and really honor the people working there, every individual. I mentioned, on my submarine, the most junior sailor was critical to the mission. And so that was my mindset in going to operate these manufacturing plants, is the most junior person is critical to our success. And I need to make sure they understood, and they understood their role in that overall success. That was sort of my mission then. And then when I got out, I started my own manufacturing business, and now I started writing. And so my mission has shifted a little bit. But today, my North Star is all about helping to build a world with better bosses, because I saw a lot of really bad managers throughout my time. Yeah. And so now I think, probably over the last 5 years, my mission is changing. So it's with my podcast, my writing, it's all about, in the speaking I do, it's all about trying to build a world with better bosses. How do we elevate the role of leaders and show people why leadership is so important in organizations? We still have a real leadership crisis in this country. And I'm not talking political, I'm talking across the board. In most companies today, there are a lot of bad managers. And so, my mission today is to try to turn that around and make it better.
What's the biggest challenge, you think, to that?
Yeah. So the biggest challenge I've seen, it's funny, is because it's like an unanswered question that I've been wrestling with since I started writing, is that what I've noticed is that people who are great leaders are always learning, and they're always trying to improve. And they're the ones that are consuming content. So they're the ones listening to podcasts and reading books and going, watching TED Talks and going to speeches and taking notes, and they're trying to get better. Those are my fans. Those are the people that buy my books, and those are the people that listen to my podcast. They're good leaders already trying to get better, and I love them. The problem is that the 60% or so of bad managers out there are not either self-aware enough or they feel like they're good bosses, they're not consuming the content that I create and others create. They are, whether it's a lack of self-awareness or what, but they are not in that. They're not actually out there trying to get better. So the question I've been struggling with, and this is, ever since I started writing, was how do I reach the people that really need this knowledge, right? It's, I write stuff, simple things like be present, get out of your office, spend time where your people are at. It seems like such a simple message for guys like me because I hate being in my office. I'm always on the shop floor. If you saw my, of course you see I'm wearing a t-shirt. I wear t-shirt, jeans, and boots because I run a manufacturing plant. I'm out on the shop floor a lot. I like my people. I like spending time there. It's common sense to me, but so many managers they isolate themselves. So they're busy, right? They or appear to be busy. And so they're in meetings and they're on conference calls and they're in their office doing paperwork and emails. And so their people never see them, right? And so, but a lot of times these bosses are doing this out of fear because they don't want to be exposed that they don't really know what they're doing and they don't really know what they're talking about. And so a lot of times they isolate themselves out of fear. And so there's a lot of challenges. So the question, what I'm struggling with today is how do I get this positive message of leadership to the people that really need to hear it? How do we get that Gallup survey? There's a Gallup survey every year about how much engagement is in basically jobs across the world. And that level in the US has been around 65% of the workforce is disengaged. And a lot of it has to do with management. So how do we get that number to change? How do we get more people engaged, more bosses engaged? How do we get to make work less of a four-letter word than it already is? And so that's kind of what I'm trying to figure out and trying to unlock that next level. How do I get to those leaders?
I think what you're doing is part of that solution, that thing called shame, which is horrendous inhibitor of most people. And what you're talking about, people's fear of getting out of the office is shame. They're ashamed that they actually aren't competent in all the things they're doing and that they're responsible for. So they're afraid of being judged. But when you can let go of that shame and realize that everyone around you is in the same boat, I think that's such a big critical aspect to talk about. We're all in the same boat. Yes.
Yeah, you're right. You got to be there when you're just the teacher and you're just waiting for the student to appear, right? So, but
there you go. Yeah.
But again, I think I'm working. Yeah, I'm thinking I'm working on some. I have some ideas and how to maybe start penetrating this area of bad bosses and trying to get to them and get the message out there. But again, I think think about it. There's been 15,000 books written on leadership, right? And we still have a leadership problem in most companies. So we're not doing a good job penetrating. So I may not be successful, but I do think that's probably the next trick is to try to figure out how to get that message to more guys that are bad guys and gals that are bad bosses. And there's a lot of bad bosses.
There are, but also I'm a big believer. You're not going to go from 0 to 100. We're not going to fix it in one generation. But also for those listening, the book, one of them is right behind me. I read it, listened to it. I should say I have to watch. Fantastic reads. All Jon stuff is amazing. Jon, just any last thoughts or tidbits you could leave people with to walk away with and put into action right away?
Yeah, I would say this is you nailed it, which was that I say this a lot. Leadership is a people business. Without people, we are nothing. Think about a ship without a crew, right? It is a hunk of cold steel sitting in the harbor, right? It takes crew to bring a ship to life. It takes people to bring our plans to life. So don't think your plan is anything special. Don't think your dreams are anything special if you can't do it without the people around you. So leadership's a people business. And guess what? People are messy. They're going to disappoint you at times and they're going to thrill you at other times. But you've got to embrace the people. You got to bring all that messiness all together. And you can achieve great things if you can fire people up and get them passionate towards an idea or a project or a goal.
No doubt. And Jon, where can people find out more about you, but more importantly, where they can support you and your great mission of ridding the world of bad bosses?
Everything is at jonsrennie.com. All my social links are there. My books are there, my podcast. So it's jonsrennie.com.
So again, Jon, thank you for forging a path ahead for all of us and all that we're doing. And I truly appreciate you being on the show and sharing your amazing expertise with everyone.
Thank you, Rob, I enjoyed it.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Forged by Trust. If you enjoyed the show, took away a few new tools, I hope you'll click like and leave a great review of the show to show your support. If you are interested in more information about how I can help you forge your own trust building, communication, and interpersonal strategies for yourself or your organization, please visit my website at www.peopleformula.com.
I'm looking forward to sharing my next Forged by Trust episode with you next week when we chat with former Navy SEAL and entrepreneur Alden Mills as he shares how to be unstoppable.